Daenerys Targaryen stood at the prow of the ship, her hair a pale shimmer against the deepening sky, the braids stirred by the wind that carried the salt and brine of the narrow sea. She could see Westeros for the first time as a dim, promising shape on the horizon, a jagged line of land kissed by sunset's red-gold light. She thought of how Viserys would have whispered, "Ours by right," every time she tried to imagine what this shore looked like. Hers by right, in truth, but earning that right was another matter. Even with 3 dragons in her retinue, even with an army of Unsullied at her back, this was a land rife with war. The very notion of the conflict across these 7 kingdoms, the War of the 5 Kings, had fed the talk in Essos's taverns and markets as if it were some performance. But to Daenerys it was no show. It was the chaos she believed she might shape to her advantage. And so she sailed, chasing the dream her ancestors set in stone long ago. She exhaled, tasting the sea air, wondering if it would taste of ash by the time she was done. "Your Grace," said Ser Jorah Mormont from beside her. He did not speak further, but his meaning was clear. The moment was at hand. Far astern, her 3 children, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, soared in watchful arcs, their wings black silhouettes against the darkening sky, gleaming faintly whenever a ray of dying sunlight caught their scales. The great beasts had grown, no longer the mewling hatchlings who once perched on her shoulder. They were still adolescents by draconic measure, but large enough to be formidable in battle. And in the War of the 5 Kings, they would be more than formidable. They would be the stuff of nightmares for any who might stand against her. Her small fleet had been battered by storms and tested by the drifting dangers of pirates, but they had eluded the worst. She had sailed west from Slaver's Bay with her Unsullied, with the freedmen who chose to follow her, and with a handful of loyal Essosi captains who found in her a cause, sometimes from faith in her bloodline, sometimes from pure mercenary interest, and more often from awe at her living dragons. All in all, she had only a modest force, but perhaps enough to carve out a foothold. She did not dream of turning all the 7 kingdoms at once, not without alliances. That was the game. The subtlety that Ser Jorah so often reminded her was vital. Sunset tinted the waves with the color of blood as she allowed herself one more breath of hope. They would land beneath cover of darkness, near the foothills around the Blackwater Bay. King's Landing lay far to the north and east, behind formidable walls, behind armies loyal to the Iron Throne. But that same throne was contested. The city was strangled by war. Word from Essos had suggested that King Joffrey, little more than a boy, rumored to be cruel, held the capital in a precarious position, and the Lannisters strove to keep it that way. The Tyrells had joined them, or so the rumors said. Meanwhile, Robb Stark held the north in rebellion. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself rightful king, as had his late brother Renly, and the realm was rife with petty lords choosing sides like gamblers around a loaded table. And so, the War of the 5 Kings bled the land, fueling a hunger among the small folk for peace, perhaps even a Targaryen peace. Daenerys pressed her hand to the polished rail of the ship and prayed silently to the old gods, the 7 to Lawler. She did not care who might be listening, so long as they allowed her to do what must be done. That night, the fleet set anchor off the coast of Blackwater Bay. The silhouettes of King's Landing's walls were just barely discernible, crowned by torchlight flickers. Beyond them, the Red Keep would stand perched on its hill, overshadowing the domain that had once belonged to House Targaryen. The painted table in her mind told her she would find no easy approach. King's Landing was heavily fortified. Taking it now, with so few men, would be as futile as hurling pebbles at a fortress. She had another plan. Land near the Rosby Road, find a secure location among the rolling farmland and scattered villages, gather intelligence, discover if there were enemies of the Lannisters who might welcome her or remain neutral until they saw her strength, and then strike. Under moonlight, Daenerys led the small landing party ashore. The Unsullied moved in disciplined silence, boots sinking into wet sand as they formed a perimeter. The air was chill, and each exhalation from the men curled in silver plumes around their heads. Even the dragons seemed subdued, gliding overhead in near-soundless vigilance. She was grateful for that. The last thing she needed was for her presence to be heralded across Blackwater Bay by shrieking roars. Outside the city's immediate sphere of influence, the farmland was silent. On her march inland, she glimpsed abandoned cottages, their doors swinging off the hinges, and battered barns with black holes for windows. War had touched even this place, only a short journey from the capital. Soldiers had likely raided these homes, confiscated harvests, pressed the men into service, or simply slaughtered them. Her heart grew heavy. This was the reality of war. Children left to starve, orphans with nowhere to go, and fields left fallow or burned. She had seen much horror in Slaver's Bay, but this was Westeros, the soil that should have been hers. It grieved her that the home she had dreamed of was so full of death. By dawn, they found a small hill within an overgrown orchard. It was ringed by half-fallen stone walls, possibly from some minor lord's outpost. Here, Daenerys made her temporary camp, letting the soldiers set up palisades with felled wood from the orchard and the forest beyond. They worked quickly and quietly. A few villagers had come, timid in the early hours, to see what was happening. Some carried baskets of dried apples or meager crops, hoping to barter for coin, or perhaps driven by fear to see who had claimed their land. Daenerys, noticing their hollow cheeks and battered clothes, offered them silver stags for their goods, fair payment. "No man or woman should be robbed," she said. The villagers eyed her with suspicion but took the coins. A few dared to whisper words of thanks. One man, older, with a limp and a deeply lined face, lingered a moment. She saw him look upon the Unsullied, then up at the black silhouettes of her dragons perched on a broken watchtower. He said nothing, but his eyes told her he had seen much war in his lifetime. Now, perhaps he saw another wave of it. As her men established a semblance of fortification, she retired to the shade of a crumbling wall and consulted with Ser Jorah and Grey Worm, her loyal commander of the Unsullied. Their maps were crude, gleaned from smugglers and half-remembered sketches. Still, she traced a path toward the Rosby Road, which led north and west. They debated the next steps. Should they remain hidden, gather more intelligence, or try to contact sympathetic lords? Jorah insisted they needed knowledge of King's Landing's current defenses, but knowledge would be no good without allies. The next day, her scouts returned, leading a captured Lannister outrider. He was a young man, perhaps no older than 18, filthy, exhausted, and trembling. They had found him alone on the forest path, presumably a messenger or scout returning to King's Landing. His tabard bore the roaring lion of Lannister crimson, but it was tattered, and his eyes darted with the skittishness of a cornered animal. Daenerys was not cruel. She offered him water and bread, but she interrogated him firmly. The young scout revealed that King Joffrey still held the throne, but there were rumors that Robb Stark, the young wolf, had inflicted multiple defeats upon the Lannisters in the Riverlands. There were also whispers that Stannis Baratheon had retreated to Dragonstone after failing to take King's Landing in a grand assault not too long ago, but that he continued to gather his strength. The boy seemed too frightened to lie, and Daenerys gleaned enough to know that the capital was not yet stable. King's Landing's defense was formidable, bolstered by both Lannister gold and Tyrell support, but the realm had grown weary. Some still remembered the Targaryen name, if only as a story. She dismissed the scout unharmed, allowing him to flee. Perhaps he would run and warn his superiors. Let them think a small band of raiders was encamped in the orchard. She was not here to raid. Not yet. When word inevitably reached the capital of a foreign host in the outskirts, Daenerys was certain that curiosity or suspicion would send a greater force. Perhaps that was good. If she were to draw them into the open, she could show them the price of facing her. The whisper of dragons might do much to unnerve the defenders. Yet she had to be careful. If they sent too great a force, she would find herself hard-pressed. She had no illusions of unstoppable might. The Unsullied were superb fighters, but they were also few compared to the combined might of the Lannisters and Tyrells. Morning broke on the third day, the orchard shining with dew. Daenerys was awakened by the distant blast of horns echoing across the rolling fields. She emerged from her makeshift shelter, bracing herself. Riders on the horizon. 2 columns, at least 100 men on horseback with spears glinting in the morning sun. A small force, perhaps a scouting party. Her heart quickened. The moment of open confrontation had come earlier than she expected. Ser Jorah had the unsullied form a line behind the orchard's fallen walls. Daenerys stood in front of them, her posture regal, her chin lifted. She wore leather riding clothes, pale breeches, and a vest emblazoned with a three-headed dragon. The grass was damp beneath her boots, the sun behind her. She could almost see the shapes of her dragons circling above. She prayed they would stay aloft out of arrow range until she commanded otherwise. The riders approached cautiously. Their captain, a knight in half-plate bearing the golden rose of House Tyrell, halted his company a stone's throw away. He called out, "Halt! You stand on the king's land. What business have you here?" Daenerys could not help but lift a corner of her mouth at those words. The king's land. Which king, she might have asked. She spoke clearly, letting her voice carry. "I am Daenerys Storeborn of the House Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. I have come for what is mine." A ripple of uncertainty moved through the riders. The knight hesitated, but she saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes. "There is only one king in Westeros, by the grace of the Seven," he said slowly. "King Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name. If you mean to pledge fealty, you should do so in King's Landing. If you intend treason, you would do well to depart these shores and trouble us no further." She observed him, seeing a man caught between fear and duty. He had noticed the unsullied, disciplined, and silent. And in the distance above, the faint shapes of dragons. If he had a keen eye, he might have spotted them as well. She spoke again, voice unwavering. "Treason? Against the usurpers who slaughtered my family?" She allowed her tone to harden. "I will not flee. I will not bow. Return to your masters and tell them the dragon has returned. The war is not for 5 kings, but for 1 queen, rightful and true." The knight's face hardened. Maybe he had expected some merchant's daughter playing a conquest, but her confidence and the cold efficiency of the Unsullied unsettled him. At last he said, "My orders are to maintain the peace in this region. If you do not depart, we will be forced to remove you." Ser Jorah moved closer, his sword still sheathed but his posture radiating readiness. "We have no wish to spill blood unnecessarily," he called. "But you will find that removing us is not so simple." There was a tense moment. Then the knight gestured to 2 of his men, and they wheeled their horses around, galloping back in the direction of King's Landing. He remained behind with the rest, forming a line that faced the orchard. They were clearly awaiting reinforcements or further orders. Daenerys exhaled carefully. She needed to decide her next move. At any moment, the call for battle could ring out. She turned and silently gave Grey Worm a nod, signaling him to remain in position. She would wait, let them see that she was no simple marauder who had come to burn and pillage. The hours dragged on. The tension grew. The sun climbed high, turning the orchard's grass golden. She could see the riders shifting uneasily in the distance, their horses stamping. At last, near midday, a second troop appeared, this one larger, perhaps 300 strong, with men-at-arms on foot trailing behind. The banners of House Lannister were there, alongside the rows of Tyrell. They set up in neat ranks. A single figure rode forward, a tall, lean knight in ornate armor enameled with gold and green, flanked by 2 standard-bearers. Daenerys recognized him from descriptions, Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, famed throughout Westeros for his prowess at tourneys, rumored to be as brilliant in the field as he was at jousting. He removed his helm and shook out a cascade of dark, curling hair. Even at a distance, she could see his stare was intense. He called out, "I bring word from King's Landing. Lay down your arms and come with us peacefully. Otherwise, we will crush you here and now." Daenerys stepped forward again, feeling her heart pound. She had no illusions that the Tyrell-Lannister alliance would surrender simply because she claimed birthright. But she might demonstrate enough strength to gain time, or perhaps to force them to consider negotiations. She raised her voice. "Ser Loras Tyrell, I am Daenerys Targaryen. If you know your history, you know that my ancestor conquered these lands with fire and blood. I have no desire to ravage. I come to claim the throne that was stolen from my family." She paused, letting the breeze carry her words. "I ask you to stand aside." His face was unreadable across the distance. The time of the Targaryens ended with the Mad King. You have no claim here but that of a pretender. But if you lay down your arms, perhaps King Joffrey will show you mercy. At those words, Daenerys's fury flared, memories of the atrocities committed against her family, the deaths of her father and brother, the scattering of House Targaryen to the corners of the world. Yet she kept her voice steady as she uttered the command, "Dracarys." Above, there was an answering roar. The air shuddered with it. 3 streaks descended from the sky in a swirl of wings and reptilian grace. Drogon leading, with Rhaegal and Viserion behind, their bodies shining like living jewels in the midday sun. The Lannister and Tyrell soldiers cried out in terror, horses rearing, men clutching at spears. The orchard became a chaos of screams and stamping hooves as the dragons unleashed a torrent of flame above the enemies' heads, scorching the air. Daenerys did not command them to incinerate the force, not yet. She only wanted to show them what they faced. The dragon swooped low, then soared upward, shrieking. Even from afar, she could feel the wash of heat from Drogon's fire. When they had finished their pass, Daenerys let her voice ring out again. "I do not seek needless slaughter. I would speak with your commanders. Let us parley." Smoke drifted across the field, the grass smoldering in black patches where the dragon flame had scorched it. Many of the knights' horses had bolted. Men coughed and stumbled, shaken by their close brush with fiery death. Ser Loras looked on, stunned and ashen-faced, his fine armor streaked with soot. He took a moment to compose himself, then wheeled his horse around, shouting orders to his men. He did not approach to parley, but neither did he command an immediate charge. Daenerys watched as the battered company began to withdraw, men casting fearful glances at the skies. She suspected that they would fall back to King's Landing or perhaps to a more defensible outpost. The arrival of dragons on the battlefield changed all calculations. Ser Jorah came up beside her. "Well done, Your Grace. That will give them pause. But they will return in greater numbers or with new contrivances. King's Landing has alchemists if the rumors are true. They may attempt the same wildfire they used against Stannis Baratheon's fleet." Daenerys nodded, remembering what she had heard of wildfire, an unholy green flame that consumed flesh and steel alike, unstoppable once unleashed. "We must be cautious," she said. "But for now, let the realm know that House Targaryen has come home." The news spread through the Crownlands like wildfire itself, rumors of dragons and a silver-haired queen claiming the throne of her forebears. Small folk whispered in taverns, speculating whether she was truly a Targaryen or some pretender with monstrous beasts from Essos. Some lords scoffed, sure that a single band of foreigners could never threaten the capital. Others felt a flicker of dread. The memory of Aegon's conquest had not wholly faded from the collective mind of the nobility, especially older houses who kept records of draconic devastation. Within the Red Keep, the tension was palpable. Joffrey Baratheon, perched on the Iron Throne like an upstart crow, raged at the news of a new claimant. Cersei, his mother, gave hush orders to the court not to sow panic, but rumors leaked through servants' gossip. Tywin Lannister, the true power behind the throne, quickly began strategizing how to draw Daenerys out or kill her dragons. The Tyrells, newly allied by Marjorie's betrothal to Joffrey, were forced into an uneasy partnership. Meanwhile, Tyrion Lannister, the king's hand in all but name at one point, watched from the shadows, calculating. He had heard of Daenerys Targaryen before, whispers from Varys from across the sea. He had even tried to counsel the court about her potential threat, but at the time, Robert Baratheon was on the throne and the realm was uninterested. Now, the small council found themselves facing a new front in the War of the Five Kings, except this time it was a queen with fire-breathing allies. Weeks passed. Daenerys moved her camp from the orchard to a more defensible position near an old ruin that once served as a minor house's keep, half-burned and abandoned when war came. Her men scavenged the local farms for supplies, but she insisted on paying for what they took. More small folk approached her, some out of curiosity, some out of desperation, seeking employment, or merely a place to be safe from the foraging soldiers of both Lannister and Tyrell armies. She accepted them, provided they submitted to the order of her camp: no looting, no harming innocents. News that the Silver Queen treated commoners with fairness began to spread. A handful of hedge knights came, offering her their swords. She examined their motives carefully, but eventually accepted a few. Each new supporter, however humble, strengthened her presence. And above all, the dragons were her greatest ambassadors of power. Late in the month, a rider arrived under a white banner. He bore a letter sealed with the sigil of House Tyrell. It was an invitation to parley at a location near the ruins of a holdfast by the Rosby Road. Despite Ser Jorah's warnings of treachery, Daenerys chose to accept. She brought a small escort of Unsullied and the dragons perched at a distance, close enough to intervene if needed. The Tyrell party was led by Mace Tyrell himself, Lord of Highgarden, accompanied by his sons and a retinue of knights. They waited in a field dotted with autumn flowers, ringed by a few barren tiar. Yes. Lord Tyrell, a large man with ruddy cheeks, tried to assume a magnanimous posture, though Daenerys sensed fear behind his watery eyes. "Your Grace," he said in a tone that wavered between courtesy and condescension, "the realm is in turmoil enough. The Lannisters and House Tyrell have formed an alliance that stands for stability. We have no wish to see the small folk suffer further." If you depart these shores, Highgarden would be prepared to offer certain concessions, even gold, to ease your return across the narrow sea. Daenerys felt a flash of anger. They thought she could be bought off. She lifted her chin. I am not a sellsword, my lord. You cannot buy my departure with gold. This is my home, and I have come to free it from those who spilled Targaryen blood. Lord Tyrell's smile was strained. You speak of old grievances. The realm has moved on. King Joffrey sits the throne with the full backing of the Reach and the Westerlands. Will you make war on the entire realm for a grievance nearly 2 decades old? She glanced at the men behind him, each with a hand resting near a sword hilt. I will do whatever is necessary. But I need not war on the entire realm, only those who refuse to see the truth of my claim. Mace Tyrell waved a plump hand dismissively. I have no desire to quibble over your claim. The rumors say you have dragons, though I see none here. He cast a quick, anxious glance at the sky. War is costly, your grace. Perhaps you would consider returning to Essos until the realm is at peace. Then your claim might be considered in some capacity by the crown. He spoke as if addressing a child or a naive supplicant. Daenerys narrowed her eyes. Will it be considered the same way my father's life was considered? She let the question hang. She saw Ser Jorah's cautioning gaze, but she did not yield. I have the means to make my claim real, my lord. If you think to threaten or bribe me, you will be disappointed. Lord Tyrell's face darkened. We cannot allow a Targaryen pretender to sow chaos at our doorstep. If you will not depart, the king's forces will be compelled to rid the realm of you. Daenerys stared at him, letting her silence be answer enough. A part of her longed to show him the might of her children, to have Drogon swoop down and unleash a torrent of flame. But she held back. She needed alliances, not endless enemies. If she destroyed the Tyrells, the Lannisters would only grow more entrenched. The realm might unite against her out of terror. Yet she would not yield. Not now. As the parley ended, there was no handshake or vow of understanding. Lord Tyrell left with a face like thunder, and Daenerys returned to her camp with the knowledge that open conflict was only a matter of time. Over the next fortnight, more Lannister Tyrell forces gathered in the Crownlands. Daenerys received word through her scouts that Ser Jaime Lannister was rumored to be returning from the Riverlands, perhaps to lead the capital's defenses if it came to a siege. The outer regions bristled with watchtowers and patrols. Yet none dared approach her camp unless in large numbers, too fearful of the dragon's wrath. Meanwhile, the war raged elsewhere. Robb Stark continued his campaigns, forging alliances with the Freys, although rumors suggested some tension there. Stannis Baratheon remained on Dragonstone, licking his wounds, rumored to be looking to the Red Priestess who advised him for some new advantage. Roose Bolton took Harrenhal in a twist of betrayal, further complicating matters. And all across the realm, petty lords decided which king they would support or whether they might carve out personal fiefdoms in the chaos. Daenerys read the Ravenborn missives captured by her scouts with an eagerness to learn. She felt certain she could exploit the realm's fracturing. Somewhere among all these rivalries, she could find the wedge to drive open a path to victory. Her first chance came unexpectedly. A minor lord from the Stormlands, Lord Ardrian Celtigar, arrived at her camp unannounced, escorted by a handful of knights bearing a banner with red crabs on a white field. He kneeled before her, speaking passionately of how the Lannisters had drained the crown's coffers and forced punishing taxes upon lesser lords. He hated them, he said, for the cruelty and arrogance they displayed in King's Landing. For him, serving King Joffrey was a humiliation. He offered Daenerys his loyalty if she would promise to restore House Celtigar to its old rights once she took the throne. Daenerys was wary, an ally who arrived so suddenly could just as quickly turn on her. Still, she listened. If Lord Celtigar spoke truly, there might be others. Bring me more lords, she told him. Convince them to break from the Lannisters. Then I will give you my word that House Celtigar's ancestral seat and rights shall be honored. He departed with a dramatic bow, promising to do exactly that. Whether he would deliver was anyone's guess, but the gesture marked a turning point. Daenerys was no longer a foreigner lurking at the fringes, she was a contender. The War of the Five Kings was no longer limited to Baratheons, Starks, and Lannisters. She had forced herself into the equation, and the tremors of her arrival rippled outward. Winter was not yet upon them, but a chill crept into the wind. Daenerys found herself shivering some nights, remembering the oppressive heat of Essos. She wondered if she would ever again feel the kind of sweltering warmth. She was in Westeros now, and the bite in the air was a reminder that these lands were harsh in more ways than one. Despite the discomfort, she reveled in this new sense of belonging. She had only begun her conquest. She yearned to march on King's Landing, break the wheel of Lannister tyranny, and seat herself on the throne of her ancestors. Yet she also knew that such a move was rash without more forces. So she bided her time, forging alliances where she could, sending small envoys to the lords of the Reach, the Stormlands, even the Riverlands, to see who might respond. One evening, she received a secret visitor who traveled under cover of darkness and wore a cloak of midnight blue. He was a small, slim man, moving with a cat's stealth, and he carried no banner. He introduced himself as Varys, the Master of Whisperers, though he said he no longer held the position in truth. "I serve the realm," he told her with a soft, measured voice. "And you, my dear queen, are as much a part of this realm's story as any who claim the throne." Daenerys studied him, wary. "I have heard of you, Lord Varys. You served my father, then Robert Baratheon, then Joffrey. Why come to me now?" He placed a hand over his heart. "I have always had a care for the innocence of the realm. Your father, alas, was not a merciful king at the end. But you, your grace, have displayed mercy in your dealings across the narrow sea, freeing slaves, if the tales are to be believed. And here, as well, you have been more just than those who purport to hold the throne. I believe you might bring peace to this war-torn land, if you are wise." She regarded him carefully. "And how would you help me do that?" He revealed that the Lannisters had attempted to silence him, fearing his knowledge. He claimed that he had parted ways with them, though some in King's Landing might still believe he served their cause. In truth, he said, he had come to her because he saw in her the potential to end the ceaseless bloodshed. "I can supply you with information about the city's defenses, the movements of your enemies and potential defectors. All I ask is your protection and, in time, a place to serve in your court." Daenerys was uneasy. She knew the spider's reputation for double-dealing. But if she refused him, she would be ignoring one of the realm's greatest sources of information. "Betray me," she warned him, "and you will find yourself at the mercy of my dragons. And they have no mercy, Lord Varys." He bowed deeply. "I understand completely, your grace. I live to serve." From that day on, she began receiving clandestine reports from within King's Landing. Joffrey's cruelty had grown, the city's populace was on edge, and the Tyrells were increasingly at odds with the Lannisters over how to handle her presence. Tywin Lannister himself was still in the field, managing the war, but Jaime Lannister was expected to return soon, possibly to lead an offensive against her. Tyrion Lannister was rumored to be embroiled in political intrigues of his own, though Varys was cagey about the details. "The imp is a cunning player," he said. "He may yet prove an unexpected ally or enemy, depending on his father's will." So Daenerys prepared. She ordered Grey Worm to organize the Unsullied into flexible companies that could repel a cavalry charge or a massed assault. She consulted with Ser Jorah about tactics they might use against a larger force. Meanwhile, her dragons grew day by day. They were not yet the size of Balerion the Black Dread in the old tales, but Drogon was large enough to carry her on short flights if she dared. She sometimes practiced with him at dawn, letting him bear her weight as he soared across the sky. There was no exhilaration like flying, the wind in her hair, the land spread out beneath her like a painted tapestry, the thunder of dragon wings. It made her feel unstoppable, like a queen of old Valyria. But she forced herself to remember that wars were won by more than just raw power. She needed cunning, alliances, and a vision for the realm that might attract the hearts of men and women beyond her loyal followers. At the turn of the next moon, the Lannisters made their move. Scouts raced back to Daenerys' camp with news that a large host was marching out from King's Landing, 6,000 men, led by Jaime Lannister, flanked by contingents of Tyrell knights. They bore siege engines, catapults, scorpions, and supplies that suggested a plan to encircle and starve her out. Daenerys summoned her captains. She studied the terrain. The old ruin she held was perched on a slight hill with a shallow river behind it. The advantage was minimal against such an army. She had perhaps 3,000 disciplined fighters, including the Unsullied, plus a ragtag group of 1,000 more freedmen and hedge knights. And, of course, the dragons. But she knew that if she allowed herself to be hemmed in, the Lannisters could whittle her down with artillery, or worse, with wildfire. She made her decision. "We will not be pinned in a siege. We will meet them on ground of our choosing." Ser Jorah concurred. Better to strike unexpectedly than to be cornered. Thus, Daenerys had her forces pack up. By nightfall, they marched from the ruin, heading east along the winding roads that curved around gentle hills. The plan was to lure Jaime Lannister's host to an open field near a bend in the river where the land was wide and flat. There, she could use her dragons to maximum effect, and the Unsullied's discipline would help them stand firm against cavalry. They arrived under a clear sky, the moon high. Daenerys' scouts fanned out, ensuring no ambush awaited them. By dawn, Jaime's vanguard appeared, banners bearing the Lion of Lannister, the Golden Rose of Tyrell, and several lesser houses. Columns of soldiers emerged from the west, dust rising in plumes beneath thousands of marching feet. From a low ridge overlooking the field, Daenerys spotted Jaime Lannister in gleaming armor astride a white horse, flanked by a squadron of knights. Trumpets blared. She could hear the distant shouts of commands as the Lannisters formed ranks, archers taking position behind lines of foot soldiers, cavalry on the flanks. The Tyrell Knights, likely the flower of Highgarden's chivalry, gleamed in polished steel. Ser Jorah drew his sword. Grey Worm donned his helmet, the raised ridge upon its crest standing proud. The Unsullied formed a shield wall, spears bristling. Daenerys stood at their forefront, her heart hammering. This was it, the first real battle in her quest to reclaim the Iron Throne. She looked skyward, searching for the silhouettes of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. They circled, waiting for her command. A thunder of drums from the Lannister lines signaled the advance. The cavalry on each flank began to trot forward. Archers knocked arrows, awaiting the signal to loose. Jaime Lannister, golden hair flashing, seemed to be scanning the field. Did he see her? Did he recognize the silver-haired woman who stood defiant among her foreign soldiers? A horn blast from Daenerys' side. Grey Worm and the Unsullied marched out in perfect unison, shields locked, spears at the ready. The freedmen formed looser ranks behind them while the Hedge Knights positioned themselves on the flanks to counter the Lannister cavalry. Daenerys mounted a horse. She was not yet ready to ride Drogon into the fray, not until the crucial moment. She remembered the teachings Ser Jorah had given her. A queen must see the field, must know when to commit her greatest weapons. The Lannister archers loosed a volley of arrows. The Unsullied raised their shields overhead in a tight formation. Arrows rattled down, mostly deflected, though some men cried out, hit in the gaps. Another volley, another rattle of missiles. The cavalry began to charge, picking up speed, lances lowered. The ground trembled beneath the thunder of hooves. Daenerys could see the banner of the Lion streaming in the wind. This was no raid or skirmish, this was war unleashed. At the last moment, Daenerys shouted, "Now," and the horns on her side blew a shrill note. Out of the sky came a roar that shook bone and marrow alike. Drogon dived, flames gushing from his maw in a jet of orange fury. He scorched a swath across the Lannister cavalry's path, sending horses shrieking and rearing in terror. Riders were thrown, set ablaze, or trampled in the sudden chaos. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, breathing fire that ignited the dry grass. Smoke billowed and men screamed as the dragons soared overhead. The Lannister charge wavered, portions of it broken as riders tried to veer away from the inferno. Daenerys seized her moment. She ordered the Unsullied to advance at double time, smashing into the disrupted cavalry. Spear points found flesh, shields battered aside the horses that remained. The Tyrell Knights on the other flank, seeing the devastation, attempted a more cautious approach, but the Hedge Knights rode out to meet them, swirling into a clash of steel and blood. Above, the dragons circled. Daenerys could smell the acrid tang of burning hair and charred flesh on the wind. Her stomach twisted. Battle was always horrifying, but she forced herself to remain resolute. This was war. If she faltered, the price would be the death of her cause. Jaime Lannister regrouped the center, leading a charge of foot soldiers forward, hoping to catch the Unsullied from the front while the cavalry reformed on the flanks. But the Unsullied held formation, thrusting spears in disciplined thrusts, driving the Lannister foot back. Even so, the sheer weight of numbers began to push them. Daenerys could see that while her dragons wreaked havoc, she did not have enough men to easily rout the Lannisters if they mustered discipline. Her savage bursts of dragonfire were sowing panic, but she needed a decisive blow. She signaled Ser Jorah and he led a reserve of mounted freedmen around the left flank, hoping to fold the Lannisters from the side. Drogon swooped low once more, unleashing flames that consumed scorpions and catapults before they could be used. A cheer went up among Daenerys' ranks as the enemy's siege weapons exploded in plumes of fire. The Lannister lines wavered again. Daenerys urged her horse forward, brandishing a sword she had rarely used in actual combat. Her heart pounded in her ears. Across the fray, she spotted Jaime Lannister, his golden hand glinting where once flesh had been. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw anger and perhaps a trace of admiration there. All around them, the battlefield churned with screams, the clash of metal, the roar of flames. Tyrell knights fought valiantly, but they were unprepared for the dragon's fury. Even so, the Lannister host outnumbered Daenerys' forces nearly 2-1. Portions of the line were heavily engaged. Some of the freedmen began to break under the relentless push of heavily armored men-at-arms. The Unsullied alone stood firm as a rock amid the tide. Daenerys realized that if she did not press her advantage now, momentum might shift. She needed a final hammer blow. Spurring her horse through the swirling chaos, she found a slight rise in the ground. From there, she lifted a horn and blew a single, piercing note, a signal to Drogon. Her black-scaled child descended like a thunderbolt, landing heavily on the ground in a swirl of dust and flame. Gathering her courage, Daenerys sheathed her sword and climbed atop Drogon's back, feeling the rough scales beneath her palms. The world seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Archers tried to aim at her, but their hands shook. Drogon roared, his voice deafening at such proximity. Then, with a mighty leap, he took flight, carrying her skyward. Below, the battle spread out like a tapestry of madness, fires, swirling lines of men, glints of steel. She guided Drogon with a combination of body weight shifts and calls, remembering how she had practiced. She directed him toward the thickest concentration of Lannister forces at the center. Let them see the Queen of Dragons in all her fury. Drogon unleashed a storm of fire, turning the tide in an instant. Soldiers broke and ran, fear unhinging their discipline. The Unsullied pressed forward with grim efficiency, cutting down those who fled or forcing them to throw down their weapons. The Tyrell Knights, seeing the center collapse, also began to retreat, disorganized and panicked by the sight of a Targaryen astride a massive black dragon. Daenerys circled overhead, eyes scanning the ground. She could see Jaime Lannister shouting at his men to hold, but he was swiftly losing control. In a last, desperate attempt, he spurred his horse in her direction, lance couched, as though he might unseat her from Drogon's back by sheer courage. Drogon landed to sweep a fresh line of foot soldiers with fire. Jaime galloped through the ash, his gilded armor covered in soot, face contorted in resolve. He seemed determined to kill the dragon or die trying. Daenerys felt a flicker of respect for his bravery, misguided though it was. She pulled back on Drogon's spines, lifting his head so that the next jet of flame wouldn't set the entire ground ablaze beneath them. Jaime charged closer. Daenerys was about to command Drogon to unleash his fire when suddenly a figure on horseback, Bronn or another Lannister man, grabbed Jaime's reins, yanking him aside at the last moment to save him from certain death. They tumbled away, lost in the smoke. Another moment, and Daenerys might have ended the Kingslayer then and there. Within minutes, the Lannister and Tyrell ranks were in full retreat, streaming back westward. The field was left smoldering, scattered with the dead and dying. Daenerys ordered her men not to pursue too far. She would not waste lives in a reckless chase. The victory was hers, though purchased at a cost. Dozens of Unsullied lay fallen, and many freedmen as well. But the Lannisters had suffered far worse. It was the first major defeat they had suffered in the open field near the capital since the war began. After the battle, Daenerys walked among her wounded. The moans of the dying rose like a dissonant chorus. Her dragons circled overhead, occasionally landing to feast on the bodies of fallen horses. She forced herself not to turn away from the gore or tea. He stench. This was the price of her claim. She knelt by a mortally wounded freedman, a middle-aged man with blood spattered across his face. He tried to speak, but only coughed up blood. She took his hand and murmured words of comfort until he stilled, tears burning her eyes. He had died for her. She felt the weight of that responsibility more keenly than ever. She rose slowly, her face set. If she faltered now, all these deaths would be for nothing. In the following days, the news of Daenerys Targaryen's victory thundered through the Crownlands and beyond. Whispers of Dragon Queen passed from lip to lip. Small folk were in awe that she had routed an army nearly twice her size. The Lannisters withdrew to the safety of King's Landing's walls, reinforcing the city's defenses. The Tyrells, humiliated by the defeat, began to question the wisdom of continuing to fight on Joffrey's behalf. Some rumored that Margaery Tyrell looked upon the chaos in fear for her family's fortunes. While the official line from the Red Keep was that they would destroy the Dragon Pretender, morale had taken a devastating blow. Daenerys seized the momentum. She moved her forces closer to King's Landing, occupying key roads and outposts. She refused to let the city breathe, cutting off vital supply routes. Already, the capital had endured a siege from Stannis Baratheon not so long ago. Now, with winter drawing nearer, food was scarce and the presence of Targaryen forces on the horizon made the cost of living soar. Bread riots broke out in Fleet Bottom. The Gold Cloaks struggled to contain the unrest. Even as she tightened her grasp, Daenerys received an unexpected raven from the north and appeal from one of Robb Stark's envoys, seeking an alliance. They offered mutual recognition. The North would be a sovereign kingdom under Stark rule and they would aid her claim to the Iron Throne in exchange for her acknowledging northern independence. The letter was polite, but firm. Daenerys weighed the proposal. The Seven Kingdoms had always been one realm under Targaryen rule. Breaking off the North would be a blow to that legacy. But if forging such an alliance hastened the downfall of House Lannister and secured her place on the throne, perhaps it was worth considering. She sent a measured reply, suggesting that if Robb Stark would lend his strength against the Lannisters and show loyalty to her cause once she was enthroned, she might recognize northern autonomy. That at least would open negotiations. She would decide later whether to keep or break such a promise. War demanded pragmatism, but she did not wish to gain the throne through deception alone. She wanted a realm that would truly accept her. And if the North desired independence, perhaps a new shape of Westeros would emerge, one less prone to these endless cycles of bloodshed. So the stage was set. The War of the Five Kings had become a war of 6 claimants, though Daenerys styled herself not a claimant but the rightful queen. King's Landing loomed. The shadow of the Red Keep beckoned her forward. Soon, she would stand before the gates of that ancient seat of Targaryen power. She thought of her forebears who built the city, who shaped the realm's destiny with dragon flame and steel. She did not wish to be a tyrant like her father was in his final days. She did not wish to drench King's Landing in fire and blood without cause. Yet she would take the city if she must. In the weeks that followed, she made preparations. Lord Varys slipped her new tidbits of intelligence. The Lannisters had indeed stockpiled wildfire hidden throughout King's Landing, and they would not hesitate to use it if dragons tried to breach the walls. King Joffrey's cruelty was at a fever pitch. Public executions and floggings were doled out to quell dissent. Cersei Lannister lurked in the Red Keep, weaving plots, while Tywin Lannister himself was rumored to be returning from the field. Daenerys steeled herself for the coming siege. If she could lure Tywin's forces into open ground once more, she might repeat the victory. But that old lion was too cunning, too ruthless. He would not engage her so recklessly. No, if she wanted the throne, she would have to find a way into the city and ensure it did not burn beneath the madness of wildfire in the process. And so the Dragon Queen waited on the outskirts of King's Landing, forging alliances, winning over lords disgruntled by Lannister rule and consolidating her hold on the Crownlands. Her dragons grew stronger with each passing day, their roars shaking the air at dawn and dusk. The small folk murmured that the last Targaryen had come home, that history itself moved again beneath the beating of leathern wings. In the Red Keep, a boy king cowered behind his mother and grandfather, all the while proclaiming that he was the rightful ruler and that the dragons would be slain before winter's end. The realm watched, trembling with anticipation as 2 mighty forces prepared to clash, and with them, the fate of the Iron Throne itself. Daenerys felt the weight of her destiny pressing upon her every time she looked at the city's distant skyline. Even in the hush of night, she imagined she could hear the cries of children, the pleas of the hungry, the regrets of ghosts who once walked these streets in happier times. This was the home her family had built and also the place where they had fallen into madness and ruin. She swore she would not repeat those mistakes. She would not be the Mad King's daughter. She would be something better, stronger, purer, forging a new era of justice. But as the banners snapped in the wind, as the cold crept into her bones, she knew that the final confrontation approached swiftly. She remembered the words that echoed through Targaryen history, fire and blood. She prayed the realm might see more than that her dragons could inspire as well as terror. Yet if the city's rulers forced her hand, she would not hesitate. She would reduce the Red Keep to rubble if it stood between her and the future she envisioned. And so the stage was set for the turning of the world's wheel. Daenerys Targaryen, no longer a frightened girl in the shadow of her brother's ambition, stood at the threshold of her birthright, flanked by the loyal Unsullied, the devoted freedmen, cunning counselors, and the monstrous power of dragons that were growing every day into legends of their own. The War of the Five Kings would soon become the War of the Dragon Queen, winter or no winter, wildfire or no wildfire, Lannister gold or no gold. Destiny beckoned, and she would answer in flame and flight, forging her name across Westeros with every beat of her dragon's wings. Dawn spread its pale fingers across the Crownlands, revealing banners drooping in the chill wind. Daenerys Targaryen stood outside her tent, wrapped in a heavy cloak the color of dusk, surveying the sprawl of her camp. Beyond it, the distant walls of King's Landing rose, the Red Keep perched above them like a crouching beast of redstone. She heard the low rumble of her dragons, the occasional roar as they demanded fresh meat. If she focused, she could pick out Regal's green shape wheeling against the early morning sky while Viserion's pale wings drifted nearby. Drogon, largest and fiercest, was nowhere in sight, which meant he was off hunting. She inhaled the raw air. Autumn had advanced in the weeks since her battle with the Lannisters on the open field. The stench of that conflict clung to the earth long after the last funeral pyres burned low. The survivors called it the Field of Cinders. She had left a company of Unsullied behind to tend to the wounded and bury the dead with dignity, but no funeral rite could wholly erase the acrid memory of scorched grass and charred flesh. As she watched, a rider arrived along the trodden track that connected her camp to the outlying farmland. An Unsullied guard stepped aside to allow him in. He wore plain armor, lacking the livery of any great house. Once he dismounted, he swept off his helm and approached Daenerys with measured steps. He was one of her scouts, a lean man from Essos who spoke the common tongue with a thick accent. Bowing, he announced quietly, "Your Grace, Lannister patrols are fewer these last 2 days. It seems they have pulled men closer to King's Landing." Daenerys knew what that signaled. Tywin Lannister must have returned or was about to. The city was bracing itself. The Gold Cloaks had also grown more active within King's Landing, imposing martial law to quell the bread riots. The news from Varys supported that. Supplies were too scarce to feed the city's hungry mouths, particularly since Daenerys' forces had cut several vital roads. She had no desire to starve small folk. She had seen too much suffering in Slaver's Bay. But war demanded strategic choices. The Lannisters would not yield the city merely from fear. They needed pain, or at least the threat of worse pain, to bring them to the negotiating table. Whether Tywin or Cersei would negotiate remained in question. They might prefer to gamble everything on a single gamble of steel and wildfire. Ser Jorah Mormont approached from behind, nodding a greeting to the scout. He carried a rolled parchment. "Your Grace," he said, "we've had a raven from Dragonstone." "From Stannis Baratheon?" Daenerys asked, arching an eyebrow. It had been many weeks since she considered the possibility of Stannis seeking common ground with her. The so-called king in the Narrow Sea had once attacked King's Landing by surprise but been repelled through the use of wildfire at the Blackwater. He had retreated to Dragonstone to rebuild, overshadowed by the alliances the Lannisters had forged with the Tyrells. Yet rumor said Stannis was gathering fresh support among lesser lords who resented Lannister or Tyrell oppression. "Indeed," said Ser Jorah. He unrolled the parchment. "He requests a parley, though he puts it more like a summons. He wants you to come in person to Dragonstone. He writes that he is the rightful lord of the 7 kingdoms by blood and law, that you are but a Targaryen pretender. However, he is willing to discuss an alliance to overthrow the bastards and usurpers who now hold the Iron Throne." Daenerys studied the words. She had never met Stannis Baratheon, but what she knew of him painted a portrait of a stern, humorless man bound to a red priestess who claimed power through the Lord of Light. "He has no better right to the throne than the Lannisters do," she mused, "though at least Robert was no child of incest, as Joffrey is said to be. But after what his family did to mine after the usurpation, how can I trust him?" Ser Jorah's lips thinned. "Trust may be too strong a word, Your Grace. Yet if your mutual enemy is the Lannisters, that might suffice for an alliance of convenience. King's Landing would be caught between us, your army on land, and Stannis' ships off the coast." She considered it. "The man claims the throne by virtue of Robert's rebellion that murdered my father and brother. He might ask me to bend the knee or accept a lesser arrangement." "He might," Jorah agreed. "But these are desperate times for Stannis. He lacks the numbers to challenge King's Landing alone. After his defeat on the Blackwater, many of his men deserted, though some returned once his cause regained a little momentum. He must know that your dragons shift the balance of power." Daenerys glanced toward the western skyline, where faint plumes of smoke rose from the city. Perhaps she could parley with the man as equals, though she had no intention of kneeling. "Send word that if he wishes to discuss terms, he should come to me," she said at last. "I will not sail to Dragonstone and leave my army. Let him travel here under a flag of truce if his cause is so urgent." A small smile tugged at Ser Jorah's mouth. "As you wish, Your Grace." He bowed and retreated to dispatch the raven. Shortly afterward, she met with Grey Worm to discuss the next movement of troops. In the lull, as the Lannisters reconfigured their defenses, she intended to tighten her hold on the Crownlands. She could not simply wait for Tywin to decide the hour of battle. A few small castles within a dozen leagues still flew banners of uncertain loyalty. If she persuaded or intimidated them into siding with her, she could secure a broader perimeter. Grey Worm bowed his head in acquiescence but advised caution. The Unsullied remained her backbone, and she could not risk scattering them across too wide a territory. Meanwhile, Lord Varys, still wearing his customary robes of muted silk, arrived by twilight with further tidings. He claimed that Cersei had gathered the city's pyromancers and that large caches of wildfire were rumored to be hidden in strategic tunnels beneath King's Landing. He even hinted that some were placed near the Red Keep itself, though whether that was to fend off a siege or to ensure no one else could seize the royal seat remained unclear. Daenerys' blood chilled at the thought of wildfire burning the entire city if the Lannisters felt cornered. They had used it once before to horrifying effect. She would have to ensure that any assault on the walls did not devolve into a suicidal inferno. She remembered how her father, in his madness, had intended to burn the city with wildfire. The ghost of Ares lingered in every rumor of the green flame. She vowed silently that she would not allow the city to be destroyed. Its people needed liberation, not annihilation. For the next fortnight, her forces pressed outward, capturing minor holdfasts along the King's Road and the Rosby Road. Most of the local lords, faced with dragons and disciplined Unsullied, capitulated without a fight. Daenerys accepted their oaths carefully, stationing small garrisons to ensure they would not renege. In one such holdfast, she found hidden stores of grain that she ordered distributed to the hungry villagers who had been arriving in her camp. Word spread that the Dragon Queen showed compassion to those who yielded. Meanwhile, men who had fought for the Lannisters were taken as prisoners of war rather than butchered, though Daenerys made it known she would punish any atrocities committed against the common folk. A handful of captured Lannister knights were paraded to show that her cause was far from powerless. Some of them eventually bent the knee, lured by the promise of a seat at the table of the new regime, though Daenerys had Ser Jorah vet them carefully before allowing any into her ranks. One crisp morning, as a cold wind whipped through the camp, a new visitor arrived. A single galley flying the crowned stag banner of House Baratheon sailed up the Blackwater Rush and moored at a hidden inlet. From it disembarked a small party in plain cloaks. Daenerys' scouts quickly escorted them to her presence. There, in a quiet orchard near the road, she met with these delegates of Stannis Baratheon, half expecting to see the man himself. Instead, she found only 3 envoys. Ser Davos Seaworth, a grizzled, humble man with kind eyes, a gaunt young maester who spoke in measured tones, and a priest in red robes whose face she recognized from rumors as Melisandre. Daenerys regarded them with cool curiosity. "Lord Stannis is not with you?" she asked. Davos bowed. "Your Grace, he remains on Dragonstone, preparing his forces. I am Ser Davos Seaworth, hand of the King Stannis, He caught himself, clearing his throat. "He asks us to treat with you, to see if there is ground for alliance." The Red Priestess, Melisandre, inclined her head, her copper hair bright against the scarlet fabric. Daenerys sensed an unsettling presence in the woman, as though a silent flame burned behind her eyes. "I bring greetings from the Lord of Light," Melisandre said, "who has shown me visions of a great darkness in the north. The Iron Throne is only one piece of the war to come." Daenerys was uncertain how to respond to such cryptic talk. Instead, she focused on Ser Davos. "I offered that Stannis come to me if he truly wishes to discuss an alliance." Davos looked uneasy. "He considered it, Your Grace, but it was decided that the risk was too great, given the uncertain roads and watchers near King's Landing. Instead, he sent us to propose terms." "And what are these terms?" Daenerys asked, aware that Ser Jorah and Grey Worm stood watchfully at her sides. The maester cleared his throat. "King Stannis holds that by all the laws of succession, following King Robert's death, he is the rightful heir, as King Joffrey's claim is based on incest, not Baratheon blood. Therefore, King Stannis invites you to join him. If you do so, you shall be acknowledged as—" "Enough," Daenerys interrupted, raising a hand. "I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, the first of my name. It is I who hold the true birthright to the Iron Throne. I do not accept that Stannis Baratheon is the rightful heir to a rebellion that murdered my kin." He might prefer to call me a pretender, but we both know how empty that word is if the people see my dragons and bow to me of their own free will." She paused, letting the orchard's hush underscore her resolve. "If Stannis truly desires to end Lannister rule, I will consider a pact, so long as he recognizes me as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Let him keep Dragonstone if that is the best compromise. But I will not bend the knee to him." Ser Davos exchanged a look with the maester, then nodded slowly. "I see. Stannis anticipated that might be your stance, your grace. Still, we were asked to hear your own terms to see if there can be an arrangement that spares the realm more war." Daenerys weighed her words. "Tell him this, if Stannis commits his fleet and men to aid in taking King's Landing from the Lannisters, I will grant him a royal pardon for his rebellion. I will grant him lordship over Dragonstone and perhaps Storm's End, once it is taken from whichever lesser force currently holds it, provided he does homage as my vassal. That is my offer." The priestess, Melisandre, watched Daenerys intently. "And what of the great threat beyond the wall?" she asked, her voice low and resonant. "Have your dreams shown you the cold darkness stirring in the far north? Stannis is the Lord of Light's chosen champion. He fights a war for the dawn." Daenerys's eyebrows knitted. She recalled half-heard rumors of whites and white walkers from traveling men in Essos, stories of old Nan from Winterfell's kitchen legends. "I have heard tales of some threat in the far north. My father's father once made treaties with the Night's Watch, but that was long ago. If there is truly a doom, we will face it, but not by letting the Lannisters remain on my throne." Melisandre's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "All wars are one war, Daenerys Stormborn, the living against the dead. But we each have our roles." Daenerys felt a prickle of unease under that red gaze. "My role is to claim the Iron Throne. If Stannis' desire truly is to protect the realm, let him kneel to its rightful ruler." She squared her shoulders, dismissing the twinge of doubt. "That is my final word." Ser Davos sighed, though not rudely. He seemed a practical man, caught in a swirl of grand ambitions. "Then we shall convey your offer, your grace. I pray a time comes when we have no more reason to shed the blood of the realm's people." She nodded. "Agreed. Tell your king he is welcome to send further word if he wishes to accept." They parted. Daenerys could not help but watch Melisandre's departing figure. The priestess seemed too calm, too certain, as though she glimpsed future shadows that all others missed. Daenerys recalled the many cults in Essos, the Red Priest's fervor for their fire god, and she shivered. Involuntarily. She was the mother of dragons forged in fire. She had walked into the flames on Khal Drogo's funeral pyre and emerged unburnt, dragons hatching around her. So why did Melisandre's talk of prophecy unnerve her? Pushing the thought aside, she refocused on the war at hand. A new challenge arose only days later. Tywin Lannister's forces finally appeared on the horizon. He had returned from the Western Front, bringing columns of heavy horse, hardened veterans of the Westerlands, and a large supply train. Robb Stark had inflicted grievous losses on the Lannisters in the Riverlands, yet Tywin still commanded an impressive army. By all reports, he intended to break Daenerys' blockade of the roads and resupply King's Landing. The Old Lion had proven his cunning many times over, besting Ned Stark, outmaneuvering other rebels, forging an alliance with the Tyrells that turned the tide. Now Daenerys expected a more formidable foe than Jaime's ill-fated attempt on the Field of Cinders. Her scouts watched carefully, tracking Tywin's approach. They reported that the Lannister host numbered at least 10,000 men, though some marched in battered regiments. The supply wagons formed a train that stretched for miles. Tywin would not risk scattering that train in dangerous territory. He likely remembered how Robb Stark had ambushed him or outmaneuvered him in the past. Daenerys called a war council. Ser Jorah, Grey Worm, Missandei, and a few other trusted captains gathered around a makeshift table where a rough map of the Crownlands lay unrolled. Tokens representing her Unsullied, her freedmen, and the Lannisters dotted the worn parchment. She could see the roads that led to King's Landing. Tywin was approaching from the northwest, aiming to slip around and reach the city from the Rosby side or possibly from the Gold Road, which fed into the capital. "We could attempt an ambush," Ser Jorah suggested, tapping a spot near a shallow ford in the Blackwater. "Strike while they're stretched thin along the banks. But it would be a risky engagement. He has greater numbers." Grey Worm nodded in agreement. "Unsullied can hold the ford, but their crossbowmen may cause us many losses before the dragons arrive." Daenerys studied the curve of the roads, her mind turning. "Tywin must know the threat my dragons pose, so he might try to lure them into range of scorpions or wildfire traps. We cannot assume they will be as vulnerable as Jaime's force was." Missandei inclined her head, her delicate features tense. The city's gates remain closed to us. Perhaps Tywin hopes to unite with the garrison inside, then crush us between two forces. Daenerys considered the possibility of letting Tywin's supply train reach the city, trusting that the small folks' desperation and hatred for the Lannisters might spark riots within. But that was uncertain. By feeding the city, Tywin might ease tensions and reassert control. She wanted to keep the city hungry enough that they would welcome change, but not so hungry that thousands starved. A quiet voice interjected, Lord Varys, standing at the edge of the gathering, hands folded across his broad midsection. Might I suggest another approach, Your Grace? The Lannisters focus on the roads because they believe you intend to hold them. But if you harry their supply train from the sky, you could force Tywin to chase your dragons rather than march on the city. A series of swift raids might cripple their wagons and create confusion. Ser Jorah nodded slowly. That could work, but we would need to be cautious about scorpions hidden among the wagons or bowmen with barbed shafts. We must never underestimate Tywin's cunning. Daenerys exhaled. Yet it might be the best approach, strike their supply lines, retreat before they muster a defense, repeat. We can keep them from ever reaching the gates, force them to camp in the open, starve them of supplies. Meanwhile, the city continues to feel the pinch. She turned to Grey Worm. Prepare a detachment of cavalry along with archers. We'll move swiftly at dawn. The dragons and I will lead the first strike from above. So it was decided. That night, Daenerys found little rest. She paced, listening to the distant grunts and murmurs of her camp. She thought of the famed cunning of Tywin Lannister, how he had orchestrated the Red Wedding, if the rumors were true, or at least set it in motion by forging alliances with Walder Frey and Roose Bolton. That alliance had broken the Northern Rebellion and ended the life of Robb Stark, according to some whispers. Others said Robb yet lived and was forging new treaties. The rumors conflicted and she longed for certainty. War was as full of false tales as it was of real bloodshed. Still, if Tywin had orchestrated that betrayal, he would not hesitate to do the same to her if he saw an opening. She closed her eyes and thought of her dragons as they grew from hatchlings in the Red Waste. If the Lannisters lured Drogon or Rhaegal or Viserion into a trap with wildfire, it would be a calamity for her, not just strategically, but personally. Her children were living proof of her destiny. To lose even one would tear at her soul as surely as a mother losing a child. She hardened her resolve, she would not let them come to harm. She would be cunning, would strike only on her terms, then withdraw. Let Tywin gnash his teeth. At first light, a rolling mist clung to the lowlands. Daenerys donned her leather riding gear, the Targaryen sigil embroidered on the vest. Her silver-gold hair was pulled into tight braids. Outside her tent, Grey Worm had assembled 200 cavalry and a smaller company of mounted archers. Farther along, the dragons roost at the edge of the camp, devouring a supply of fresh slaughtered sheep to prepare them for flight. When Daenerys approached Drogon, he raised his head, black scales glinting with a faint sheen in the morning gloom. She murmured soothing words in High Valyrian, placing a hand on his flank. He accepted her presence without complaint. Then she climbed carefully onto the ridge of his back, gripping the makeshift saddle arrangement that her followers had devised in recent weeks, leather straps anchored around Drogon's chest and shoulders, not perfect but functional enough for short flights. Rhaegal and Viserion responded to her whistles, bounding into the sky with thunderous beats of their wings. With a final command, Daenerys urged Drogon skyward. He surged into the air, the ground dropping away beneath them. Wind whipped her hair, cold air stung her cheeks. Each time she took flight, her heart pounded with the same exhilaration she had felt in Essos, though now it was tempered by the knowledge she flew to kill. Below, Grey Worm led the cavalry forward at a swift gallop. The plan was to catch the tail end of Tywin's supply train, destroy as many wagons as possible, and retreat before the main Lannister host could counter. The miles sped by beneath Drogon's wings. Rhaegal and Viserion flew in tight formation to his left and right, their roars echoing across the cloudy sky. They soared over farmland, over patches of forest just beginning to show the colors of dying leaves. Then, near a bend in the Rosby Road, Daenerys spied what they had come for, a snaking line of wagons flanked by marching soldiers in Lannister crimson. War horns sounded below, the line scrambled to form some semblance of defense. A few scorpion bolt throwers mounted on wagons hastily tried to wheel around and aim at the dragons above. But Daenerys had the advantage of surprise and altitude. She urged Drogon into a stoop, feeling the muscles beneath her coil with terrifying power. Dracarys, she shouted, the High Valyrian word tearing from her lungs. Drogon unleashed a torrent of flame. Rhaegal and Viserion mirrored him and the supply line erupted in chaos. Flames leapt from wagon to wagon, igniting cloth, barrels of grain, casks of oil. Soldiers screamed as they scattered. Some tried to throw spears up at the dragons, but their weapons fell short. The Scorpion crews struggled to angle their machines, but Drogon wheeled aside, flames searing the wood and melting the iron bolts before they could be loosed. Below, Daenerys glimpsed Grey Worm's cavalry smashing into the rearguard, cutting them down or capturing those who threw aside their weapons. Within moments, half the wagons were ablaze. The acrid stench of burning food and flesh rose in a thick black column of smoke. She circled overhead, scanning for any sign of Tywin's main force. It was nowhere in sight, a few distant banners, perhaps, but too far to intervene quickly. Satisfied, Daenerys signaled her dragons to cease their assault. She had no wish to waste precious flames if the wagons were already destroyed. Grey Worm's men withdrew promptly, leading a few captured wagons of their own for spoils, barrels of grain and salted meat that had not yet caught fire. Daenerys guided Drogon to land momentarily at the edge of a smoldering wreck. The heat stung her eyes, but she forced herself to look upon the devastation. Supplies meant for King's Landing's defenders were now consumed. Her heart clenched at the knowledge that it was all necessary. The Lannisters fed themselves on the realm's labor while smallfolk starved. By destroying these wagons, she hastened the downfall of Joffrey's tyranny. Still, the sight of men writhing in flames, screaming, would stay with her. War demanded horrors. She pulled back on Drogon's reins and launched into the sky once more, returning to her lines. Shouts of victory rang out from her men. The Lannister survivors either lay sprawled in the burning grass or had fled. Not a single Scorpion remained unscathed. Her first raid on Tywin's supply train was a rousing success. She intended to repeat this tactic as often as possible, forcing Tywin to move slowly under constant fear of aerial assault. Let him try to defend thousands of wagons with archers, she would not commit her dragons carelessly to any kill zone. They would strike like lightning, vanish like mist. Perhaps then Tywin would be forced to fight her in open battle under conditions of her choosing. Or perhaps he would realize that continuing the war was futile. Over the following days, Daenerys enacted a series of similar raids. Tywin attempted various responses, dispatching outriders to lure her cavalry into ambush, fielding lines of longbowmen that shot clouds of arrows skyward. Even feinting with smaller decoy wagons in hopes of drawing her dragons within range of hidden Scorpions. But she was not so easily deceived. Varys's whispers and her own scouts' vigilance kept her informed. Each time, her dragons descended where the Lannisters were most exposed, unleashing swift havoc, then soaring out of reach. It was a war of attrition, and the Lannisters were bleeding gold and grain by the day. The once impressive supply train dwindled, leaving Tywin's men weary, demoralized, and short on rations. Before long, desertions began, small groups of soldiers slipping away into the night, unwilling to die in Dragonfire for a cause that no longer seemed winnable. While the Crownlands watched this unfolding drama, King's Landing sank further into chaos. The bread riots grew so severe that the Gold Cloaks found themselves battling their own citizens in the streets. The price of a loaf soared to staggering heights. Tyrell grain shipments that might have eased the crisis never arrived, thanks to Daenerys's blockade. Cersei Lannister, barricaded inside the Red Keep, demanded harsh reprisals against the traitorous scum in Flea Bottom. Joffrey, always eager for cruelty, ordered archers to fire into crowds. Tyrion Lannister reportedly opposed such measures, or so Varys hinted, but the king listened only to his mother's counsel and his own sadistic impulses. Corpses piled up. The city smelled of rot and sewage. Some small folk began to flee if they had the coin or means, heading anywhere beyond the city walls. As the tension mounted, Daenerys continued to receive tidings of other corners of the realm. The Ironborn had begun reaving up the west coast, but House Bolton now held the north, or so the rumors claimed, having betrayed the Starks. The Riverlands were in a patchwork state of ruin, with some lords still loyal to a dead king in the north, others bending the knee to the Lannisters. Dorne remained quiet, outwardly neutral, though Oberyn Martell was said to harbor a deep hatred for the Lannisters. Daenerys wished she could extend an olive branch to the Martells. After all, her mother had been a Martell, or at least Rhaegar Targaryen's children had Martell blood. But the lines of succession and marriage were tangled beyond easy unraveling. For now, Dorne seemed content to watch from afar, waiting for the realm to exhaust itself. Eventually, Tywin Lannister's battered force drew close enough to King's Landing that they combined with the city's defenders, but only after suffering a string of humiliations. Daenerys chose not to press the advantage by assaulting them at the gates. Those gates bristled with scorpions, archers, and potentially caches of wildfire. The city had been turned into a fortress ready to immolate friend and foe alike if threatened. Instead, Daenerys encamped close, ensuring no further caravans could resupply the city from the countryside. She planned to let time gnaw at the Lannisters from within. The small folks' misery weighed on her conscience, but the alternative was an all-out assault that might see King's Landing burn to ash. As autumn waned, conditions inside the city became dire. Tywin Lannister, still the hand that guided the realm's war machine, realized that if he did not break Daenerys' siege, King's Landing would soon tear itself apart. Varys reported that an entire quarter of Flea Bottom had fallen into the hands of violent mobs. Joffrey, furious and afraid, retreated deeper into the Red Keep. Meanwhile, Marjorie Tyrell tried to distribute what little food remained in an attempt to keep the populace from turning on the castle itself. It was an impossible task. Those living in the wealthier districts hoarded bread, while the poor starved in the gutters. Daenerys could have waited indefinitely. Starvation would eventually force the city's gates open. But the scale of suffering within gnawed at her. Each night, she thought of the children crying in the dark, the mothers who could not feed them, the men who died defending scraps from the castle's men. Was this what it meant to claim one's birthright? 1,000 times, she reminded herself that she had shown mercy. She was not unleashing dragonfire on the city. She was not the Mad King. The siege was the lesser evil compared to ravaging King's Landing with wildfire. Yet she felt the silent accusation of innocent blood each time she closed her eyes. She remembered Slaver's Bay, how she had refused to let the old order remain at the cost of the helpless. How was this different? She was strangling a city. She prayed that the final blow would come soon, that the Lannisters would yield or a swift assault would succeed without igniting hidden wildfire. At last, she found a glimmer of hope in the unlikeliest quarter. Word arrived in her camp that Tyrion Lannister, disgraced, marginalized at court, his position as hand usurped by his father, wished to treat with Daenerys in secret. Varys vouched that Tyrion was genuinely desperate to avoid the city's destruction and had grown disillusioned with his sister's cruelty and Joffrey's madness. Daenerys wondered if it might be a trap, some cunning ploy by Tywin. But Varys insisted that Tyrion and Tywin were hardly allies of heart, they despised each other in subtle ways. The imp sees which way the wind blows, Varys said. He is too clever to remain on a sinking ship. He might be an invaluable ally or at least a well of information. Daenerys decided the risk was worth it. She arranged a midnight rendezvous in a ruined sept outside the city walls, protected by a ring of Unsullied. Tyrion arrived in a hooded cloak, accompanied only by one nervous squire. In the moonlight, Daenerys studied the dwarf's features, mismatched eyes, a scar across his face from an earlier battle, and a sharp, intelligent gaze that missed nothing. He bowed awkwardly, then dispensed with pleasantries. "My father has no intention of surrendering," Tyrion said, voice hushed. "He believes that eventually you will be forced into a direct assault and that the threat of wildfire will deter you from using your dragons freely. He stockpiled the substance in key points across the city. If your dragons come near the walls, he intends to spark an inferno that might kill tens of thousands, including your forces outside if the winds blow ill." Daenerys' expression hardened. "So he means to burn the city if he cannot hold it?" "Yes and no," Tyrion said with a grimace. "He's not quite as mad as my nephew, but he will not hesitate to use the threat or the actual fire to keep you at bay. And he might do worse if Joffrey presses him. My sister would see the city in ruins before she surrenders. But," he continued, "there may be ways to neutralize the caches." She listened intently. If Tyrion knew how to sabotage the pyromancer's supply or disable the hidden caches, that could pave the way for a safer assault. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You are a Lannister." He laughed bitterly. "I am also the family embarrassment, the twisted monkey demon, the imp. My father sees me as a monster, my sister would sooner see me dead, and my nephew is a sadistic little whelp. If I can save the city from them and perhaps carve out a more favorable future, I'll do it." He paused, sincerity flickering in his eyes. "I won't pretend I'm an altruist, Your Grace. I'd prefer to preserve my own skin. And if that means switching sides to the winning cause, so be it." She accepted his bluntness. "And you believe I am the winning cause?" "I've seen your dragons," he said simply. "I've seen my family's supply trains in flames, my father's army humiliated. King's Landing is dying under the Lannister banner. You might not take the city in a day or a month, but eventually you will. I'd rather help you do it now and spare tens of thousands of innocents." Daenerys allowed herself a faint smile. "If your help proves genuine, I will remember it when I sit the Iron Throne." Tyrion bowed slightly, lips curling with wry humor. "That's all I ask." They spoke long into the night, huddled near a guttering lantern in the ruin of the Sept, flanked by Unsullied. Tyrion described the Red Keep's labyrinthine passageways, the probable locations of wildfire caches, the route by which the pyromancers traveled. He warned Daenerys of the cunning alchemist Wisdom Haleen, who oversaw the king's stockpiles and might have booby traps set in place. He also offered suggestions for how to sow discord in the city, perhaps by sparing or even rewarding certain gold cloaks if they opened the gates. A single well-timed bribe could avert a bloodbath. By the time dawn broke, Daenerys had a clearer picture of what must be done. A frontal assault was still perilous, but if she could slip trusted men into the city to sabotage the wildfire caches, she could neutralize that greatest threat. From there, she could coordinate an uprising among the starving populace. They did not love Joffrey. All they lacked was hope and a spark to light their anger into revolution. If the gates were opened from within by bribed gold cloaks or a rebellious throng and the city's alchemists disabled, she could bring her dragons in more safely. The conquest of King's Landing might become a swift, decisive affair, toppling the Lannisters without reducing the city to ash. That same morning, Tyrion parted ways. Promising to remain discreet until the appointed moment, Daenerys watched him slip back toward the city, carrying a letter she had penned for certain eyes only, an invitation for the gold cloaks to lay down arms in exchange for leniency and silver coin. If they refused, they would face Dragonfire. But in Daenerys' experience, loyalty built on fear alone was fragile. She needed to offer them something more. So, in that letter, she vowed that any city watchman who helped spare the populace from slaughter would be pardoned and remain in service under the Targaryen crown. The Gold Cloaks had once been Aegon's city watch, after all, in the earliest days of Targaryen rule. She hoped a hint of that historical romance might sway some. Or, if not romance, perhaps coin and mercy would do. Within a week, she received word that a few key Gold Cloak officers were indeed open to negotiation. Tyrion played the go-between, ensuring the message reached Daenerys' ears through Varys' channels. More encouragingly, rumors of sabotage among the pyromancers trickled out, fires that destroyed certain caches from within, or accidents where the vaults collapsed. No official cause was ever declared, but a handful of the city's most destructive wildfire stockpiles went up in green flame that scorched only empty tunnels. Varys reported that Cersei was furious, suspecting traitors in the Red Keep, yet unable to trace the sabotage. Slowly, methodically, the city's capacity to scorch itself from within was reduced. At the same time, Daenerys began sending her freedmen infiltrators into the outskirts, disguised as peasants. They carried seeds of rebellion, stirring the people's hatred for Joffrey, spreading the story of a Targaryen queen who paid for goods, who freed slaves, who never turned her dragons on innocent villages. "She feeds her followers," they whispered. "She shows mercy. Better the dragon's daughter than the lion's cub." The story spread in Flea Bottom and along the city docks, whispered in taverns where men nursed watery ale, or among washerwomen scrubbing rags in the filthy waters of the Blackwater. Slowly, the climate of the city changed from hopelessness to defiance. All was nearly in place. Daenerys had only to select the moment to strike. She did not want to wait so long that Tywin discovered the sabotage or sealed the gates against any uprising. Winter's chill was creeping steadily. Another wave of refugees arrived at her camp daily, seeking food. She could ill afford to let the siege drag on through the onset of true cold, which might weaken her forces as well. She had already lost men to flux and fevers that came with camp life. No, it was time to bring matters to a head. 2 nights before the planned assault, Daenerys walked the perimeter of her camp in the quiet hours. She paused at a rise where she could see the glow of King's Landing's torchlit walls. She was tired, bone-tired, yet her mind churned with anticipation. Ser Jorah joined her, his eyes hooded in thought. "It will be dangerous," he said softly. "You are about to gamble everything." She nodded, letting the crisp air sharpen her senses. "I've known for a long time that reclaiming the Iron Throne would be a risk. I cannot become queen by half measures." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the distant murmur of the city. Then Ser Jorah touched her arm lightly. "I believe in you, Daenerys Targaryen." She placed her hand over his briefly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all your counsel." The next day, they put the plan in motion. A portion of the Gold Cloaks, suborned or sympathetic, would open the King's Gate at midnight once certain signals were given. Freedmen agents inside the city would incite a riot that would draw the bulk of the Lannister forces away from the gate. Tyrion would ensure that the last critical wildfire caches were neutralized or left guarded by men secretly loyal to him. Then Daenerys would fly in with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, sowing enough terror to break the defenders' discipline while Grey Worm led the Unsullied through the opened gate. If all went as planned, the city would fall quickly and the Red Keep would be taken with minimal bloodshed. But wars rarely go exactly as planned. At midnight, Daenerys soared above the moonlit skyline on Drogon's back. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked her, their shapes gliding silently in the dark. She peered down at the king's gate, looking for the lit lantern that was the agreed-upon signal from the Gold Cloak conspirators. She saw nothing. Her heart clenched in fear. Had they been discovered? Had Tyrion been caught? Below, in the narrow streets near Fleet Bottom, she glimpsed flickers of movement and torchlight. Then the city erupted in chaos. A riot had begun. She heard distant screams, saw a wave of people surging down the main thoroughfare. Flaming debris soared through the air. The gold cloaks on the walls rushed to see what the commotion was about. Daenerys circled, scanning for the promised signal. At last, a cluster of torches on the ramparts near the king's gate flickered in a pattern, twice, then a pause, then once more. That was Tyrion's improvised signal. So the men at the gate had not been able to place a single lantern discreetly. Instead, they improvised with multiple torches. Relief washed over her. It was time. She let Drogon roar, loud and piercing. That cry carried across the city, sparking terror but also hope among those who had heard rumors that the Dragon Queen would deliver them from the Lannisters. As she descended, Rhaegal and Viserion swooped lower, circling the gate towers. Archers on the walls took aim, but some hesitated. Others loosed arrows that sailed wide or bounced off the dragon's scales. Daenerys spotted a scorpion in one tower, but the men operating it seemed to be locked in a melee with gold cloaks who might be Tyrion's conspirators. Within moments, the scorpion was overrun or abandoned. The king's gate swung open. Grey Worm and the Unsullied rushed in. The plan was for them to secure the gatehouse swiftly, then flood into the city. A portion of the freedmen cavalry followed, though many remained outside to guard the flanks in case Tywin's remaining forces tried to attack from behind. Daenerys guided Drogon to spout flames against the city walls, not so much to destroy them. These walls were massive stone, but to keep the defenders from mustering in any orderly fashion. At the same time, Rhaegal and Viserion soared over the rooftops, breathing gouts of fire down narrower streets where Lannister troops might gather. Yet she had warned them away from the densest neighborhoods to avoid mass civilian casualties. The plan was terror, not indiscriminate slaughter. From her vantage above the king's gate, Daenerys saw gold cloaks dropping their arms, some kneeling in surrender. Others fought fiercely, loyal to the Lannisters or simply too terrified to realize surrender was an option. But the sheer shock of seeing 3 dragons in the sky, combined with the city's rampant hunger and the riot, made the defenders crumble. Shouts of "Open the other gates" and "Bring down the traitors" filled the night, echoing off stone walls. Smoke curled through narrow alleys, lit by the orange glow of scattered fires. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, horns sounded. Daenerys could see from afar the castle perched on its promontory. A small shape, a rider on a white horse, galloped across a courtyard. Perhaps Joffrey or the King's Guard. They might be preparing a last stand or searching for an escape route. Cersei might hide in Maegor's Holdfast with her younger children or with what remained of the Queen's Guard. Tywin, if present in the city, would be marshalling any loyal men. The final confrontation awaited Daenerys there. As planned, once the King's Gate was secured, the Unsullied pressed forward into the main avenues that climbed the hills toward the Red Keep. Daenerys circled overhead, scanning for scorpions or pockets of archers. Most had melted away or been commandeered by turncloaks. Here and there, she glimpsed savage street fighting. Freedmen with black and red armbands battled Lannister men-at-arms in torchlit squares. City dwellers hurled rocks from rooftops at fleeing lion bannermen. In some corners, the madness of mob violence reigned. Men took the opportunity to loot or settle old grudges. Daenerys wished she could bring an immediate end to the carnage, but she knew it was unstoppable once begun. The best she could do was restore order swiftly by taking the Red Keep and proclaiming a new reign. She guided Drogon to land on a wide, open yard just inside the walls of the Red Keep itself. The courtyard, once used for practice by the City Watch, was now strewn with toppled training dummies and broken wagons. Unsullied soldiers rushed in from the gates, forming up to protect her. Ahead, a line of Lannister household guards barred the way, red cloaks bright even in the half-light. Among them stood a tall figure in gilded plate, white hair glinting. Tywin Lannister, his cold gaze flicking between Drogon and Daenerys. She dismounted carefully, drawing her sword, an elegant blade from her Essosi conquests. Drogon hissed behind her, smoke curling from his nostrils. The men in Lannister colors fidgeted anxiously. Tywin's voice rang out steady. Even if you take the city, you cannot hold the realm. The 7 kingdoms will rise against you. Daenerys stepped forward, chin high. They will do no such thing. Many have already seen your cruelty. If you or your children would have yielded earlier, this might have been avoided. His green eyes narrowed. I do not yield, Targaryen. She could see he was stalling for time, perhaps waiting for an unseen advantage. But she had prepared. Regal and Viserion soared overhead, their presence guaranteeing no hidden scorpions would be turned on Drogon. The Red Keep was largely subdued by freedmen and Unsullied who had rushed in from the lower wards. Cersei might be inside the keep with Joffrey, or perhaps they had fled, but Tywin stood here with his last loyal men, defiant to the end. Daenerys felt a curious pang of respect for the old man's unwavering discipline. Even so, she did not flinch. You cannot stand alone, my lord, she said, raising her sword. Throw down your steel or burn. Those are your choices. For a moment, Tywin Lannister stood motionless as if carved from stone. Then, with visible disgust, he dropped his sword. One by one, his guards followed suit, the clang of steel echoing across the courtyard. Daenerys signaled Grey Worm, who stepped forward and seized Tywin's arms, binding them. The old lion did not resist, only glared. You may have your throne, girl, he said, voice low, but the realm will remember how you took it. Daenerys's mind flashed with images of the city in chaos, the hungry crowds, the battered wagons outside the walls, and the memory of men burning on that fateful field. I took it as gently as I could, she replied, and I will rule more gently still. Shouts from within the keep announced more surrenders. The clang of dropped weapons rippled through the fortress. Daenerys let herself breathe. The city was hers, though pockets of violence still raged. With Tywin captured, the backbone of the Lannister power inside the walls was broken. Joffrey, if he still lived, would not remain king for long. She turned to Drogon, running a calming hand along the scales at his neck. Remain watchful, she murmured, as if he could understand every word. In a sense, he did. Smoke still curled from his jaws as he regarded Tywin Lannister with savage interest, as if deciding whether to incinerate him. Daenerys signaled the dragon to stay. Drogon settled, flicking his tail. The night ended in a swirl of triumph and tragedy both. In the lower city, freedmen and gold cloaks loyal to Daenerys tried to restore order, quell looting, and put out fires. Varys emerged from the shadows to oversee the capture of key Lannister officials, while Tyrion publicly proclaimed that the rightful queen desired peace, offering amnesty to any who laid down arms. Word spread, encouraging many to relinquish further bloodshed. At sunrise, Daenerys walked through the Red Keep's grand doors. Her steps echoed across the marble floors that had once belonged to her ancestors. Servants cowered in alcoves, uncertain if they would be spared. She assured them that they would. The corridors smelled of stale fear. In the throne room, the great iron throne loomed at the far end of the hall, its melted swords twisting upward in a menacing sculpture. Guards parted as she approached the dais. She glimpsed the seat that had once held the Mad King, her father, where Robert Baratheon had lounged in drunken arrogance, where Joffrey had perched like a malignant vulture. Now it was her turn. She paused at the base of the dais, thoughts swirling. Viserys, Rhaegar, the mother she never knew, the horrors that had led her here, from the red waste to the fields of cinders in the Crownlands. She thought of her vow to break the wheel of tyranny and suffering. Slowly, Daenerys ascended the steps. When she stood before the Iron Throne, she saw its edges glint in the early morning sun that shone through the shattered windows. A hush fell across the throne room. Unsullied, freedmen, even Lannister prisoners ringed the space, waiting. She reached out, letting her fingers brush the cold metal of a blade fused into the throne's back. The seat felt unyielding. It was said many kings had cut themselves on its edges, a sign that the realm itself was cruel to those who ruled poorly. She turned, faced the gathered watchers, and spoke in a clear, unwavering voice. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, she declared. By blood and by right, I have reclaimed the throne that was stolen from my family. Yet I come not to be queen of ashes and bones. Let it be known, I offer mercy and justice. I will feed the hungry, free the wronged, and punish the cruel. Today begins a new age for the Seven Kingdoms, an age that shall not be governed by fear alone, but by fairness as well. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the crowd. If there are those who cannot accept this, they may depart in peace now, or face the consequences of defiance. A murmur rose. Many knelt, trembling, uncertain, but deferring to her dragon-wrought triumph. Grey Worm stood proudly at the base of the throne, spear in hand. Tyrion Lannister bowed as well, quietly placing his loyalty at her feet. Far behind him, Varys looked on with an enigmatic smile, inclining his head. Off to one side, Tywin Lannister, bound, kept his head high but did not speak. His legacy had crumbled this night. The city he had sought to preserve under Lannister rule was lost. Daenerys inhaled, heart-hammering. She settled onto the Iron Throne. The metal was cold and hard beneath her, the swords of 1,000 conquered men fused into a seat that had taken generations to shape. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down. Yet in that moment, she realized how far she had come, from a timid girl sold in marriage to the mother of dragons who had toppled the mightiest house in Westeros. A rush of emotions threatened to overwhelm her, but she steadied herself. The realm needed more than a triumphant conqueror. It needed a queen of compassion and strength. She looked out across the hall. "Kneel," she said, and the watchers knelt as one, Lannister banners drooping behind them. The Red Keep was hers. King's Landing was hers. The War of the Five Kings had become the War of the Dragon Queen, and now, at last, she had seized its heart. In the days that followed, Daenerys set about restoring order. She commanded that food stores be opened to feed the starving populace, that fires be doused, that marauders and looters be put down if they would not surrender. She pardoned many gold cloaks who bent the knee, absorbing them into her city watch. She appointed Tyrion Lannister as a royal advisor, mindful that he knew the city's workings better than anyone else and that by giving him responsibility she kept him bound to her cause. She named Grey Worm commander of the city's defenses. Ser Jorah remained at her side, his counsel invaluable, though she knew he still carried burdens of his past. Missandei helped her navigate the intricacies of courtly speech, drafting edicts that promised a new era of governance. And out in the courtyard, her dragons roamed, reminders that though she offered mercy, she possessed the means of fiery retribution. Some lords in the Crownlands rushed to King's Landing with their retinues, eager to swear fealty to the new queen. Others held back, uncertain how long Daenerys' rule would last. She began sending ravens far and wide, proclaiming that the Targaryen dynasty had returned and that all who desired peace and justice should come to her and swear loyalty. In the north, the Boltons might resist. In the Reach, the Tyrells nursed bitterness, though they had lost many men in the war. Dorne might wait and watch, deciding whether to support a Targaryen restoration. Across the narrow sea, the free cities took note, seeing in Daenerys a formidable power. And beyond the wall, if the tales were true, a darkness crept southward, a threat that neither Targaryen nor Lannister had yet faced in living memory. Daenerys knew that the wars of Westeros were not truly ended. She would have to contend with the north, the Iron Islands, the possibility of Stannis Baratheon's intransigence, the ambitions of other lords. But in that moment, with the Iron Throne beneath her and the city's people flocking to the streets to see their new queen, she allowed herself a moment of pride. She had crossed the narrow sea, battled usurpers, and claimed her birthright. The War of the Five Kings was, at its heart, undone by the coming of the Dragon Queen. She thought of Khal Drogo, of her child Rhaego, of her brother Rhaegar, and all who had fallen, and she silently dedicated this victory to them. When the people gathered outside the Red Keep, Daenerys emerged on a high balcony, flanked by her dragons perched on the balustrade. She spoke in a strong, clear voice, promising to rebuild, to feed the starving, to punish those who had brought ruin upon the realm. The crowd roared, some in hope, some in awe, some in dread, all beneath the shadow of her living beasts. Over that sea of faces, she raised her arms and declared, "Lannister rule is ended. Targaryen rule is restored. Let all men hear me. No longer shall the strong trample the weak without justice. No longer shall the innocent starve in silence. I am Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, the breaker of chains, and I swear to you, by the old gods and the new, that I will not be your tyrant, I will be your queen." Her dragons roared with her, as if in approval. Below, the city thundered with acclaim, fear, and wild possibility. And far off, across the realm, lords and ladies, small folk and schemers all heard the tidings that Daenerys Targaryen had taken King's Landing. A new chapter in the history of Westeros had begun. The War of the Five Kings, so bloody and so bitter, had yielded to the rule of the last Dragon Queen, whose future deeds, whether of flame or mercy, would shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms and all its people in ways no one yet could imagine.